All right, welcome back to the Victory Degree podcast. Today we have Mike Sielski. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
Mike, you are a columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer. You're also best friends with Jake Voracek. And you have written an amazing book called The Rise, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality. Which one of those things stick out to you the most?
I think the book, I think Jake would dispute that we are best friends. So I'll go with the Kobe biography.
Fantastic. So for those who don't know, your book, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality, basically is a book on Kobe's origin story. And listen, if you're an NBA fan, if you're a sports fan, you know who the late great Kobe Bryant was. Um, but a lot of, I guess, the average NBA fan didn't really understand who Kobe was prior to the Lakers, prior to achieving all the things that he did in the NBA. And so, as a sports fan, as an NBA fan, this was my introduction to Kobe Bryant pre-Lakers fandom. So I'm curious for you, what inspired you to write the book?
Well, after Kobe died in January of 2020, I ended up writing about a half dozen columns about him for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I had strong, long lasting relationships with two people who were very close to Kobe when he was in high school at Lower Merion, just outside Philadelphia. One of them was Greg Downer, who was and is the head basketball coach at Lower Merion High School. He was Kobe's high school coach. And the other was a guy named Jeremy Treatman. And Jeremy had gotten to know Kobe when Kobe was just starting out at Lower Merion. Jeremy was covering high school sports at the time, but he eventually became kind of a quasi assistant coach slash public relations representative for Lower Merion and for Kobe. He was kind of the guy who set up all of Kobe's interviews uh, during his senior year of high school when he was the best player in the state of Pennsylvania and was deciding whether to go straight to the NBA or go to college. And I've known Jeremy for a long, long time. And as I wrote more about Kobe and his death and his connections to the Philadelphia region, it occurred to me that the country and the world as a whole knew Kobe really only from his time with the Lakers and the immediate aftermath of his NBA career. And because he had joined the Lakers when he was 17 years old, when he was so young, it was almost as if Kobe had grown up in front of everyone's eyes. But I knew growing up and living and working in the Philadelphia area that there was this, as you put it, origin story within the Philadelphia area. Kobe's connection to his family, their time in Italy and Europe, his connections to the Philadelphia basketball scene that nobody really knew outside of the Philadelphia area. So I thought if I could tell that story in a book in the right way, then people could get a sense of who Kobe was as a full figure, as a man. So I kind of wanted to do Batman Begins for the Black Mamba. That was my elevator pitch for the book, and my agent loved it, and away we went.
Can you give us a sense? So the book is about 330 pages. There's a lot of personal stories in there, like you mentioned, all the way from Kobe's time in Italy. There's personal stories about, Joe Bryant, his father, and Pam Bryant, his mother. Um, a lot of personal stories, a lot of facts, a lot of details. How much effort went into creating this book?
A lot. I mean, a lot of effort goes into creating any kind of book. I had a kind of an odd advantage, and this is going to sound terrible, and I don't mean it to, but it's true. The pandemic really helped. Um, because sports stopped. And so my full time job as a sports columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer changed. There were no more games to cover, there were no more teams to cover for a good long while. And because the pandemic shuttered most people, kept them inside, no one could run from me. So when I started working on the book, if I called someone, there was a pretty good chance that they were going to answer their phone. Or if I emailed them, there was a pretty good chance that they would respond. So it took me about a year to finish the manuscript, from research to writing. I, I wanted to speak to as many people as I possibly could, and I wanted a good cross section of people who had encountered Kobe when he was young. I didn't just want his teammates on the Lower Merion basketball team. I didn't just want his coaches. I wanted people who could give me kind of a wide swath of perspectives on him. So I tracked down his high school guidance counselor. I tracked down friends who knew him outside of the basketball team. One of the things I reveal in the book is that Kobe joined the Lower Merion Student Voice, the school's Black student union, when he was a freshman in high school. And I talked to a number of people who knew him through that organization to get a sense of what it was like to be alongside Kobe as he was looking for his identity as a teenage kid in this posh Philadelphia suburb. So a lot went into it. I spent a lot of time going over old newspaper articles. I went to the Lower Merion Historical Society. I drove to his old house and got a tour of it on Labor Day 2020. So I tried to kind of immerse myself as much as I could in Kobe's early life.
All right, let's get into the book because I took probably too many notes for this podcast. I think we could probably spend 3-4 hours going through all of the details and Kobe's entire story. But what I did want to do with you is kind of go through a progression of Kobe as you kind of paint him in the book. And I figured a good place to start would be with his parents, specifically with his father, Joe Bryant. Um, I guess even before then, you mentioned in the book that there's this myth that Kobe is from Philly, but he's actually not. Can you clarify, I guess, where's Kobe Bryant from?
Sure. Well, he was born in Lankenau Hospital, which is just outside the borders of Philadelphia. And this is something, Nik, that was a big point of contention in the Philadelphia area for a long, long time. Philadelphia, as you know, is very provincial, very parochial. Um, and if you say you're from Philly, you better be from within the city limits. I mean, I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, and I have people tell me, no, you're not really from Philly. So this kind of hounded Kobe in a way his whole life, particularly when he played with the Lakers, particularly early in his career. In 2001, you'll remember the Lakers played the Sixers in the NBA Finals, and Kobe said that he wanted to cut the hearts out of the Sixers and their fans, and people in the Philadelphia area hated him for that. But the bottom line is Kobe had exactly the kind of mentality that any Philadelphia sports fan craves in an athlete who plays for one of the teams here. So to answer your question, he didn't grow up in the city. He wasn't born in the city. He didn't grow up in the city, but he played summer league basketball in Philadelphia. He spent tons of time in the city of Philadelphia. His parents were from the city. I mean, technically, you can say Kobe wasn't from Philadelphia, but let's be honest here. Really, he was. He was as Philadelphia gets.
Listen, being a 49ers fan, I am aware of how passionate Philadelphia natives can be, and so I think that is the only exposure I need to the people of Philadelphia is whenever we play the Eagles. So I completely understand.
Yeah, that's a good example.
um, Kobe, where does that name come from?
From a restaurant that Joe and Pam Bryant loved when Joe was playing for the Sixers. Uh, they would hold their training camp west of the city in the suburbs and the towns west of the city. And there was a Japanese restaurant that Joe Bryant particularly loved, and it was called the Kobe Steakhouse. And he liked the word and the name so much that they named their first son and only son after it. He is actually named after Kobe beef.
So speaking of Joe Bryant, one thing that stood out to me, again, having not known anything about Kobe's father, is you talk about Joe being a person who relied a lot on instinct and wasn't necessarily the most calculated person, whether that be on the court or even off the court. He ran into some off the court problems, which we'll get into, but um, that was one thing that stuck out with me because Kobe seemed so calculated, at least on the court in everything that he did, but his father was not like that.
Yeah, not at all. Joe was kind of a ne'er-do-well. He liked to have fun off the court. He wasn't as disciplined on or off the court as his son would turn out to be. He didn't get into some trouble early in his NBA career with the Sixers, and I get into that in the book. He also he was naturally gifted. He was a Philadelphia high school and college basketball star. He went to Bartram High School in Southwest Philadelphia. He went to LaSalle College at the time, University now, which is my alma mater, and was a great, great player there for 2 years. And then entered the NBA draft early because he felt like he wanted to start making money and help his family out. and he didn't have the career that he would have hoped he had in the NBA. Now, part of that was the era that he played in. He was 6'9", and could really handle the ball. He was almost Magic Johnson before Magic Johnson. And at the time, a player like that, coaches didn't know what to do with a player like that. You're supposed to play him in the post. If he's 6'9", he's supposed to be down low, grabbing rebounds and dunking the ball. He's not supposed to be dribbling at the top of the key and breaking down guys off the dribble and all of that kind of stuff. So Joe felt a little out of place, but Joe brought some of his own problems on himself. He'd be late for the team bus. He'd just kind of be a little spacey at times. And as disciplined as you have to be an NBA player of any kind, he didn't really have the kind of discipline you needed to have to be a great NBA player. Certainly not in the way his son did.
You mentioned, being 6'9", having the ability to pass, to shoot, and coaches not knowing what to do with him. It's funny because in today's NBA, that is seemingly, all a coach wants, right? A wing player that can do everything, that can defend, that's versatile, especially in today's NBA. So it's pretty amazing how much the NBA has changed, I guess, since Joe Bryant's days.
Yeah, coaches have gotten much more imaginative. I think Magic Johnson had a lot to do with that. Just the changing nature of the sport. Players are getting bigger. They're getting more skilled. In some ways, I think it's hurt the sport, to be very honest, because the court almost seems too constraining for them. I'm actually just finished the manuscript for my next book, which is all about the history and myth and magic of the slam dunk. And one of the assertions I make at the end is that the basketball is going to have to start at its highest levels, is going to have to start thinking about raising the rim, because players like Victor Wembanyama and Nikola Jokic and guys like that, the court is almost too small for what they can do. They're so mobile, they're so tall, they're so fast that there's very little that astonishes us anymore in the court the way that Michael Jordan or Julius Erving did.
So going back to Joe, say what you will about, maybe him not being the most calculated person. One thing that you can't deny is, he was, for lack of a better term, an athletic freak. I think you write in the book, he ran a 4-minute mile. He was athletic. He, could do everything with the ball. And seemingly that's where Kobe got a lot of his gifts.
It is. People ask all the time, uh, how was Kobe Bryant formed? Was it nature or nurture? And a lot of it was nature, and having a father like Joe. A lot of it was also nature and having a mother like Pam Bryant, who was the disciplinarian at home, made sure her two daughters and her son did all their schoolwork, did their best academically. Kobe couldn't play basketball until he had finished his homework. Um, but Kobe was also indulged when it came to basketball. He could play with adults at a young age. His parents didn't bring the hammer down on him when it came to some of the antics that he displayed as a really young kid on the court. Bad language, selfishness, things of that nature. So, yeah, in some ways he kind of had the perfect upbringing to become the kind of figure, an athlete that he became.
So Joe spends some time in the NBA. I believe his career ends in Houston at the age of 28. I think shortly after he becomes a car salesman because he realizes, hey, I still need to make money and provide for my family. When, in your opinion, from studying Joe, why do you think his career didn't flourish like maybe it was supposed to? And maybe we've touched on a couple of the reasons, but just kind of big picture, what do you think really held him back?
Yeah, I think, as we said, bad timing and not quite cut with the edge that a truly great player needs to have. I mean, Joe was incredibly talented, incredibly skilled, could do a ton of things on the court. But the bottom line is he didn't bring it every single day the way that Kobe did. He just didn't. And I think in a lot of ways, uh, Joe Bryant was a lesson to Kobe. On the one hand, Kobe wanted to kind of redeem his father's good name. They were very close when Kobe was young, and he wanted to restore the Bryant's good name in the circles of professional and Philadelphia basketball. But in other ways, Joe Bryant was a cautionary tale to his son. Hey, you need to work at all times, because the difference between being truly great And being just another guy is very, very small at the highest levels of basketball, and you don't want to give somebody else an advantage over you in any regard.
So let's talk about some of those lessons that maybe Joe passed on to Kobe that you just mentioned. One thing that stuck out to me is, like I said, if you're familiar with Kobe, you're familiar with the Mamba mentality, this idea of being cutthroat, of just being a killer, of having these natural instincts to go out and dominate, obviously on the court. And so what surprised me is how early Kobe was showing signs of having those instincts and having that demeanor. I think, you know, eh, you brought up a story when they were in Italy, and I think he was maybe playing on a team, and he said "F you" to one of the Italian coaches, and Kobe was maybe 8 or 9 at the time. So, I mean, what was Kobe like when he was young, and where did this demeanor come from?
Yeah, I think it's the nature nurture question again. I think some of it is inherently him. And I think genetically speaking, if you want to talk in those terms, I think Pam, his mother, provides a lot of that. She was the disciplinarian, the strong willed one in the family. She ran the household. She didn't put up with any crap from anyone. And so you have that aspect of his personality. And then you have him growing up in this environment where his father is playing both in the NBA and then later professionally in Europe. He's in an environment in which he's observing and learning lessons from professional athletes all the time. And he has parents who are willing to indulge him when it comes to basketball. They, Joe brings him to practices and to games. Kobe mops the floor during games uh, in Europe that Joe is playing. And he gets to shoot around with the team. And when one of Joe's coaches admonishes him, as you said, he, snaps back at him. And Joe and Pam just kind of say, well, that's our Kobe. So it's a little bit of everything. It's kind of the perfect melding of environment and nature and all kinds of the stew of factors that come to create this individual who just commits himself to being the best basketball player in the world and has nothing else on his mind from the time he's able to conceive of such a thought when he's 9, 10, 11 years old.
How would you describe Kobe's time in Italy and the effect that it had on his eventual career?
Yeah, he's almost an alien, right? I mean, he doesn't have the upbringing that most young basketball phenoms have. Certainly not at that time in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The Bryants are a black family from America living in Italy. They are isolated in that regard. Now they love living in Italy, and that experience teaches Kobe in some ways not to see color, or at least not to judge people based on the color of their skin. But it also, when the time comes for him and the family to move back to the Philadelphia area, it kind of isolates him to a certain degree. He hasn't had the upbringing and the experiences that a lot of his classmates and peers have had. When he comes back to the Lower Merion School District in the late fall of 1991, he's lived a life that virtually no one else he's encountering has lived. He can't connect with the Jewish students, or the Christian Catholic Protestant students, or the black students, or the white students. He's kind of trying to find his own way. He doesn't know what TV shows are popular. He doesn't know what music to listen to. He doesn't know how to fit in, how to dress. And what he's got is basketball, and he uses basketball as his in to kind of gain acceptance and become someone who eventually, by the time he graduates, is the most popular and well-known figure, not only at Lower Merion High School, but in some ways the entire Philadelphia community.
Yeah, you reminded me, one thing that stuck out that you just mentioned was how Kobe viewed basketball as an escape. And I think maybe there was a part in the book where you say, Kobe thought, thank God I have basketball. It's my escape from this reality that, like you were mentioning, I don't really know how to fit in, right? I don't know how to communicate with these students. I don't know what American culture is, but I know how to dribble and shoot a basketball. So basketball really seemed like an escape for him in those early days when he moved back.
Yeah, it was everything to him. And it allowed him to kind of gain the traction he needed socially, uh, almost like a vocation. Like this is my identity. I'm a basketball player. At least that's how people were going to see him initially. And then by seeing him that way, it allowed him to kind of gain some traction in terms of getting to know people. But the flip side of that too, Nik, is that to a certain degree, he tried on personalities like he was trying on clothes. I mean, he was trying to figure out who he was. That's why he joined the Black Student Union organization. That's why he delved into rapping and music. He was really trying to get a sense of who he was apart from just being this great basketball player.
Speaking of trying on different personalities, there's a part in the book where you talk about Kobe falling in love with storytelling. And that stuck out to me because I watched one of his last interviews that he did, and I believe it was with Lewis Howes. And at the time, Kobe was, writing children's books and getting more into storytelling and movie producing. And he talks about how much he loves storytelling and how powerful storytelling is. What I didn't know was that this was a passion of his ever since he was in high school.
Yeah, his closest mentor at Lower Merion was his 10th and 12th grade English teacher, Jeannie Mastriano. They really connected. He referred to her as his muse years after they met. They stayed in contact over the years, and she really tapped into the intellectual side of his personality, his imagination. He really viewed himself. He read um, the Joseph Campbell book. Now I'm drawing a blank on the title of it, which it's a famous book, "The Hero of a Thousand Faces." Excuse me, and uh, the idea of a hero's journey. And Kobe really viewed himself as being on a hero's journey, as if he was Odysseus or Luke Skywalker, something like that. So he and Jeannie really connected on that level, and it was something that I think when you talk about Kobe and his death, I think it's something that for people who admired him and were aware of him even, it's what made his death so tragic in their eyes, is that there was this feeling that after basketball he had done things apart from the sport, storytelling, filmmaking, and there was more for him to do. And by dying at such a young age, he will never obviously get to fulfill those aspirations. And people feel like, God, what else could he have done, would he have done with the remaining years of his life?
Right. Let's get into Kobe's Lower Merion High School career. So, if you don't mind kind of setting the stage for how Kobe was, how Kobe found his way to Lower Merion High School, how he was recruited, the story of Greg Downer, how that all kind of came together.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of quaint by today's standards. Lower Merion was the local public high school that the Bryants, like any resident of Lower Merion Township, at least the side of Lower Merion Township, that fed into that high school. There's another high school within the school district. Um, would have sent their kids to. Kobe was recruited to go to private schools and Catholic schools, and but Joe and Pam Bryant wanted him to go to the local public school. Greg Downer had just taken over as the boys basketball coach there a few years earlier and had started turning the program around. Really, Lower Merion for many years had not had much of a boys basketball program to speak of. Kind of place where the uniforms were kind of ragged and they had so few guys on the team that if too many fouled out, they'd have to finish a game with four guys on the floor. Um, and then Kobe comes along. Well, first Downer comes along and starts to turn things around, and then he gets Kobe, and he realizes, oh my gosh, I've got a crown jewel here. I've got the kind of kid who comes along once in a lifetime if you're lucky. But Kobe, as a freshman, as a ninth grader, is so selfish and such a ball hog that the team only wins 3 or 4 games the entire season. And his teammates resent him because they say, who's this young kid, 14 years old, shooting the ball all the time? I don't care how good he is. We can't play this way. And over the next couple of years, there's an evolution in Kobe where Downer and other coaches and other players have to kind of work on him to say, hey, look, if we're going to be as good a team as we can possibly be, you've got to adjust a little bit, and the people around you have to adjust to you. And by the time he leaves, Lower Merion has won a district championship his senior year. They've won the state championship his senior year. And really, the Lower Merion Aces, even more than the 76ers, are kind of the Philadelphia basketball team. They're kind of this traveling roadshow all because of Kobe.
There's a quote. I think his ninth grade classmate told Kobe that he's not that good, and Kobe replied, "That's because the coach wouldn't let me shoot."
Yeah, I mean that's exactly how he felt. Was that, and you can understand it to a certain degree because, as we said, he's so isolated in his upbringing. He's learned the sport and honed his skills in the sport, kind of almost in like a phone booth, like a chamber almost. You know, he hasn't been playing a lot of team basketball, and so it's an adjustment for him, and it's rough at times. But as I said, by the end of his high school career, he's clearly the best player in the state and the best high school player in the country.
I keep coming back to this because I just can't wrap my head around it. And maybe it's just me, but the level of maturity that Kobe showed early on. I mean, there's so many examples throughout the book of teammates saying, and I quote, this kid was actually getting his body ready to play in the NBA, eating right at a young age. He wouldn't go out and do some of the things that, his teammates would do or that maybe quote unquote normal high school kids would do. Um, can you just give the audience an appreciation for how mature Kobe was and how um, I guess how seriously he viewed his, end goal of making the NBA, like how real that was for him at such a young age.
Yeah, he just kind of presumed to a certain degree, hey, I'm going to be the best basketball player on the planet, and I will do whatever I have to do to achieve that goal. So when he's playing pickup at age 13 and 14 with grown men and college players, he's putting on knee pads and elbow pads because he's seen professionals do it. He's seen his father do it. He's icing his knees after pickup games. And people are looking at him and saying, what is this kid doing? But that's the way he goes about things. One anecdote that I love is that when he was 15 or 16, he had a friend who was a couple of years older than him. And the two of them would drive around to playgrounds and parks in and around Philadelphia, and they would play basketball, but it was kind of a unique brand of basketball they'd play. Kobe was really working on things, drilling himself, working on dunks and jump shots. And the friend had two jobs. One, he would rebound for Kobe, and two, he would scream at Kobe. Kobe wanted to train himself to be able to play against the very best players in the very toughest environments in Philadelphia and around the country. And that meant playing against guys who grew up in the city who were thought to be tougher than he was. So this friend would scream at him, you're soft. You go to a white school. You couldn't play in the public league, screaming these things at him while Kobe is working on his game. And the idea of like a 15, 16-year-old willingly putting himself through that just kind of blew my mind. So those are the kind of things that Kobe did to prepare himself so that, fast forward into his NBA career, there's this famous clip of Matt Barnes. He's going to inbound the ball, and Kobe's standing in front of him at the inbounds line, at the baseline, and Barnes fakes like he's going to throw the ball in Kobe's face, and Kobe doesn't flinch. There's a reason that Kobe could get himself to that point, that he wouldn't flinch when someone threatens to throw a basketball in his face, and it's all the prep and preparation that he did back when he was a kid.
I feel like one of the themes from this podcast episode is going to end up being, the whole nature versus nurture. And when it comes to Kobe, there's this level of self confidence, and we've touched, on it a little bit throughout this episode. But there's this level of self confidence that not only he had, but others around him were just amazed by. I think there's a story of Tim Legler watching him play against D1 athletes and professional basketball players, and Tim saying, I have never seen someone be so confident at anything before, like Kobe was, with basketball. So this level of self-confidence, listen, I'm not going to sit here and say that, I can emulate Kobe's level of self-confidence, but I guess for the people listening, like what are some things from studying Kobe that he either did or that maybe his circumstances provided him with that enabled him to be so self-confident?
Um, I think a lot of that is just who he was. There's a mystery to individuality, and uh, I think the environment augmented it. I think he came from a nuclear family. He was, as we talked about, living abroad for a long time, where he could devote himself almost kind of in a monkish kind of way to honing his basketball skills. I think he was willing when he came back to the United States to make sacrifices that other teenage basketball players weren't willing to make. He was willing to stay home and watch film and video of Magic Johnson and Larry Bird and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Michael Jordan. He had a quasi girlfriend through his first 3 years of high school. And to him, a date with her was her coming over to the Bryant's house and watching basketball videos with him. Um, and his parents weren't going to tell him, hey, turn this off, go outside and have some fun. He wanted to play basketball. He told Jeannie Mastriano, his English teacher, that he often dribbled himself to sleep. So some of this is just who Kobe Bryant was, and some of it was, okay, this is who he is, and we, as the people around him, his family, his friends, his teachers, his coaches, are going to allow him to be this way. So where that confidence comes from, he's just succeeding at every level, and um, being able to play in the way that he wants to play. And with each subsequent success, he advances to the next stage of his life and his career.
So Kobe wasn't the most romantic man, maybe
No,
early in his high school in
no,
his high school
not by any
days.
stretch.
But that brings up this dichotomy of who Kobe Bryant was on the court versus who he was off the court. And, his romantic life might be one inclination of that. But I think you described Kobe as, within basketball, he was cutthroat, cunning, bulletproof, away from basketball, courteous, naive, and sheltered. So pretty stark difference between Kobe on the court and Kobe off the court.
Yeah, like I said earlier, he was looking for himself, trying to figure out who he was. He tried on different personalities. He could be comfortable amongst the honor students in his English class. He could be comfortable with the jocks. He could be comfortable with the kids who sang in the choir. But what one of the things I came away from in learning about his life was that he didn't retain many, if any, very close friends from his high school years. And that's telling, I think. He didn't have a core group of 3 or 4 people who stayed tight with him the rest of his life. Greg Downer was an exception to that rule. They stayed in close contact for years and years, but even Downer didn't know right up until the moment that Kobe announced that he was going to take his talents to the NBA. Kobe never told Downer what his decision was, whether he was going to go to college or go to the NBA. Downer had his suspicions, but Kobe never told him explicitly, "Hey, I'm gonna skip college and enter the draft right away." So one of his friends told me that he was operating at a higher level or 2 or 3 steps ahead of everybody else, and I think that's true. But I think there are costs to that as well. And I think there are some things that play out in Kobe's later life. The incident and the accusations and the sexual assault charges in Aurora, Colorado, most notably, that you can trace back to his life early on, where he just skipped some steps in the development of a quote unquote normal human being. And it led to some repercussions for him down the road.
I definitely want to get into Kobe's decision of bypassing college and going straight to the NBA, because I think there's a lot to unpack there. But even before we get to that, there were a lot of stories of Kobe. We've described him as cutthroat and cunning and bulletproof on the court. And certainly there were examples of that during practice with his teammates. And two that stuck out to me was first the one of him shoving his teammate into, I guess, a wall, and the teammate having to get stitches on his elbow. And then the second example was a teammate running away from Kobe because he was scared of what Kobe was going to do to him after missing a game-winning layup. So can you maybe talk a little bit to those two, I guess, stories?
Yeah, I mean, look, this was Kobe as Intimidator. This was Kobe as I'm the best player on the team. If you don't keep up with me, uh, I don't want to know you. I don't want you near me. And this kill or be killed mentality when it came to any drill that he was going through during a practice at Lower Merion High School. So yeah, the second best player on the team, Dan Pangrazio and Kobe are involved in a rebounding drill together, and to win the drill, to get the rebound, Kobe shoves Dan into a wall. And there's a studded there are nails and studs in the wall, and Dan's arm hits the studs in the wall, and he has to go to the hospital to get stitches. But Kobe wins the drill and is happy and raises the ball above his head to say, "I won." And there's another 3-on-3 drill during Kobe's senior year, when the last guy on the bench, little Robbie Schwartz, is on Kobe's team and takes a layup to try to win the game. And misses it, and Kobe's team loses the drill, and Kobe is not happy and kind of sort of chases Robbie around the school. It's kind of an apocryphal story. He didn't chase him totally around the school, but he was not happy. And those sorts of anecdotes are the kinds of things that people who knew Kobe back then talk about often, about what he was willing to do to win and what he demanded of others around him in the name of winning.
So Kobe's high school career culminates in him winning the state championship, both the district and the state championship, and involved Lower Merion beating their longtime rival Chester, who Kobe especially despised. They were often, portrayed as kind of tougher, let's say inner city kids. And Kobe's career, his high school career. So his junior year, he's averaging 31.8 points a game. By his senior year, he's a high school. I mean, he's a national, he's nationally recognized. People typically know who Kobe Bryant is. But it ends with him winning like I said, the state championship. So can you kind of paint the picture of what that championship meant to Kobe and kind of everything that went into that and everything that was involved with Lower Merion finally winning that, elusive state championship?
Yeah, they hadn't won a state championship in 53 years, and Kobe judged himself based on the standard that he wanted to be the best player on the best team in the state of Pennsylvania. And so that championship meant everything to him. And you mentioned Chester, and Chester was the program in Pennsylvania at the time. Chester is a small city south of Philadelphia, has lots of societal problems, poverty, crime. The kids who come out of Chester are tough. They are tenacious. That basketball program is the point of pride in the city. And Lower Merion had to beat them twice that year. They had to beat them in the district championship game, which they did, and they had to beat them in the state semifinals, which they did in overtime. And that rivalry meant the world to Kobe, the fact that he could say, we beat Chester twice. And the irony is that in the state championship game against Erie Cathedral Prep, Kobe didn't have a very good game. He only had 17 points, struggled early on. The game was a bit of a slog, but they won, and he hit 2 late free throws to ice the game, and 3 late free throws, I should say. And he finds his father at the end of the game and gives him a big long hug, and it just means everything to him. He's a champion, and again, that kind of carries over to his career with the Lakers. He always, he talked about the 5 rings, that it was about winning championships. And I think that state championship in some ways is kind of the perfect exemplar of who Kobe was as a player and a person. He's the best player, the highest scorer on the best team in the state of Pennsylvania.
And then in typical Kobe fashion, I think maybe the next night or a couple nights after, there's a party. There's a cheerleaders party. He stays for an
that
hour.
night. Yeah, that night he goes back to the post party back in Lower Merion. That they've driven home from central Pennsylvania where the game was. Everybody's hanging out, having a great time. He shows up at the party, he stays an hour, and he drives home.
Classic Kobe.
Yep.
So he wins the state championship, and even before then, he was getting recruited by Coach K from Duke. There was I guess rumors that he was thinking about going to LaSalle. A bunch of different rumors about where Kobe would end up. Obviously, he was a hot commodity. Can you talk a little bit about Kobe's recruiting process and then what eventually led him to bypassing college?
Yeah, well, I mean, his father, Joe, was an assistant coach at LaSalle University at the time that I was an undergrad there. So there were rumors all around campus that LaSalle's going to get Joe Bryant's son and he's going to resurrect the program. LaSalle had been a really good program in the late 80s and early 90s, and the university wanted to get back there. But as Kobe progresses in his high school career and gets better and better, it becomes pretty clear that he's not going to go to LaSalle. And it becomes even clearer that he's not going to go to college after the summer of 1995. To make a very long story short, John Lucas, who was the Sixers head coach and general manager at the time, was connected to Lower Merion High School. His daughter was one of Kobe's classmates. So he had seen Kobe play. He invites Kobe to some summer workouts with the Sixers and other NBA and college players. And Kobe is so terrific in those workouts and scrimmages and pickup games. He's holding his own against NBA players and then some, that he realizes, you know what, I don't have to go to college. I don't need to go to Duke or North Carolina. these schools need me more than I need them. I can jump straight to the NBA if I want to. But he doesn't want to tell anybody that. He kind of likes having this story kind of follow him the entire year. And plus, he wants to go to a particular place. He either wants to be the number one pick in the draft or he wants to go play for the Lakers. So that's what happens. And uh, it's an interesting story about how it's kind of the first glimpse of modern basketball and the understanding that athletes have nowadays that they have leverage over these coaches and these teams to a degree that we sometimes don't like to admit even today. Kobe realized, Speedy Morris at LaSalle, the coach at LaSalle, his job is riding on whether I decide to go to LaSalle or not. Coach K needs me at Duke more than I need to go to Duke. Dean Smith needs me more at UNC than I need to go to UNC. And if I want to go to the NBA, I'm going to go to the NBA and I'm going to make it one way or another.
Why why the Lakers? Because I think in the book you mentioned, I think Joe Bryant was talking about a big market team. So a LA, Chicago, that was his wish for his son. But Kobe seemed particularly honed in on Los Angeles.
Yeah, well, he wanted a big market team because Sonny Vaccaro, who was with Adidas at the time, had kind of targeted him as the next Michael Jordan. This is the guy who I'm going to build my next sneaker empire around. I did it with Jordan at Nike. I'm going to do it with Kobe at Adidas. And it's harder to do that if you're playing for the Sacramento Kings or the Vancouver Grizzlies. So the Sixers had the number one overall pick in that year's draft, and there were discussions internally about them taking Kobe, but they decided instead to take Allen Iverson. Can hardly blame them for that. But once it became clear that the Sixers weren't going to take Kobe, then these machinations go in place among Kobe and his dad and his agent Arn Tellem and Jerry West, who's the president and general manager of the Lakers, general manager of the Lakers at the time, who had seen Kobe work out and said, "We got to get this kid. We got to do whatever we have to do to get Kobe Bryant. He's going to be the best player in the draft." And so this plan gets hatched to kind of head fake these other teams in and not drafting him. Kobe doesn't work out for certain teams. And back then, if you didn't work out for an NBA team wouldn't draft you. So the plan works, and eventually the Lakers are able to make this trade with the Charlotte Hornets to be able to get Kobe, and the rest is history.
What was the Nets' involvement in this whole draft fiasco?
So the Nets, the New Jersey Nets at the time, had the number 7 pick in the draft. They had a new head coach and kind of person who was the nexus of the power within the organization, John Calipari. And their general manager was a guy named John Nash, who longtime basketball executive with Philadelphia ties, knew Kobe very well, and wanted the Nets to draft Kobe with the number 7 overall pick. And Joe Bryant and Arn Tellem had to kind of fake out Calipari uh, to get him to draft Kerry Kittles from Villanova. And I get into all of this in the book. You have to buy the book to find out how this works. But they basically uh, kind of fool Calipari into thinking that Kobe wouldn't play for the Nets. So that scares Calipari off from drafting him. The Nets draft Kerry Kittles instead, and Kobe's able to end up with the Lakers.
Yeah, like you said, buy the book because especially that story of how that draft went down and the Hornets trading Vlade and all that stuff. Again, as an average NBA fan, you just hear about the trade that sent Kobe to the Lakers, but that entire background, there's a whole. I mean, honestly, you could probably write a whole book on how all that went down and how Kobe eventually made his way to Los Angeles because it's really fascinating stuff. So Kobe's now in LA, and the Lakers sign a guy by the name of Shaq, who comes over from Orlando.
Never heard of him.
Never. I think he might be decent. We'll see,
Yeah.
though. He has a. Also, nothing wrong with the Sacramento Kings, Mike. As a Sacramento Kings fan, I gotta tell you, we're coming up. Last year we made the playoffs, first time in 16 years. This year it's to be determined. But listen, the Sacramento Kings are holding their own.
Yeah, but in 1996 they were not. That's the thing,
Fair enough.
and so big market was
Yeah.
top of mind for Kobe and his people.
Yeah. I not to get sidetracked because I want to finish, the discussion on Kobe, but when it comes to small market versus big market NBA teams, I always have this debate with my friends. Obviously, being a Kings fan, I always argue that being in a big market in the NBA is a huge advantage. What is your stance?
I think it can be. I think it's shown itself over time. Look, there's a reason players want to go play in Miami or want to go play in Boston or LA. There's something about the culture in a city like that. Whether you're just living there, if you want to live on South Beach or live in Hollywood or the suburbs of LA or live in an environment like Boston where people live and breathe Celtics basketball, those are big advantages. And I think that's part of the reason you see so much player movement and have seen so much player movement over the last 20 years is these guys want to get to advantageous spots for them, not just playing wise, but living wise.
So the book ends. I think what you said makes a lot of sense. I sometimes hate that I'm a Sacramento Kings fan because we never get any national media attention. Free agents seemingly don't want to go there, but you know what? We persevere. We'll build through the draft. That's fine. So the book ends with obviously Kobe making his way to LA. He has that terrible game against the Utah Jazz, Game 5, 1998 playoffs that ends with the Lakers being eliminated. But he does something after that game that not many people would do. What did Kobe do after that game?
So on the plane ride back on the Lakers team plane, he calls his agent's assistant and says, "Open up the local high school gym for me. When I land, I'm going to head straight there, Palisades High School. Do whatever you have to do to make sure that gym, that basketball gym, is open." So she does. Alyssa Graubau is her name, and she takes the steps that need to be taken to get that gym open. And in the dead of night or in the wee hours of the morning, the Lakers team plane lands, and Kobe drives to Palisades High School and starts shooting and starts working on his game because he's not going to let what happened in Game 5 of that series against the Jazz happen again. He shot 4 air balls. He was embarrassed on national TV in front of the entire country, and he's going to work to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that's where the book ends, because you can see the takeoff beginning right there.
Having studied Kobe as closely as you did, and being involved with sports for as long as you have, I'm curious, what are your favorite lessons that you have taken away from Kobe and his life and his legacy?
It ties back to, I think, Nick, something that's come up lately in the discussion around sports and life. It's that clip from Kara Lawson, the Duke women's basketball coach, talking about don't wait for easy, handle hard better. And I think Kobe did a lot of that, intentionally and unintentionally. He learned when it came to basketball how to handle hard better, whether it was working out a little bit more every day, whether it was preparing to succeed. You don't necessarily have to do it to the degree that Kobe did, but that's something I think we can all take from him. He learned how to handle hard and made it part of his day to day existence. And there's a lot to be said for that if you want to succeed in basketball or writing or your career, whatever you want to do. Learn how to handle hard better.
Do you think if you were to interview Kobe today, he'd say that he has any regrets from his time at Lower Merion?
That's a good question. And I think that's one of the mysteries of Kobe now that he's gone. Would he say he has regrets? Probably not. But I think he'd also acknowledge, I could have handled things in certain situations a little differently. I could have connected more with my peers. I could have done things away from the basketball court a little bit differently. But I think all in all, he'd say, no, I did what I needed to do to get to where I needed to go and be who I needed to be.
Yeah. Mike, this has been a fantastic conversation. I mentioned before we started recording, I just finished reading the book maybe 15 minutes before this episode. And for those listening or watching, highly, highly suggest if you are an NBA fan, a sports fan, just a fan of greatness, I suggest that you go pick up Mike's book, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality, The Rise, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality. It's a fantastic read. I read it in about 2 days because I just couldn't put it down. And Mike, like I said, I'm not just saying that because you're in the podcast. That is a genuine compliment. You did a fantastic job covering Kobe. And like I said, as an NBA fan, as someone who's watched sports and who grew up with Kobe Bryant crushing my heart when he beat the Kings time and time again in the playoffs. Listen, I only knew Kobe from, maybe about '01 and '02. Had no idea who he was as a high schooler and as a kid growing up. But now that I do, it's the respect and admiration that I had for him has only gone up. And I think it's only going to go up as we continue to remember him and the legacy that he's left behind. So, Mike, fantastic book, gotta say.
Nik, thank you so much. Check, mail, etc.
Love it. Mike, we gotta end this podcast with a little thing that we do with every one of these victory degree podcasts. So every podcast I ask my guest to leave a piece of advice for the next guest. However, the catch is that you don't know who the next guest is going to be. So our last guest was Mike McCartney, another Mike. I feel like I should just rename this podcast to like the
The Mike
interview,
podcast.
yeah, interviews with Mike or something. But Mike McCartney is an NFL agent. He is the current agent of Kirk Cousins, of Josh Dobbs, of Aiden Hutchinson. And his advice for you was chase excellence, a good name, and credibility. What does that mean to you, and what is your piece of advice for our next guest?
I mean, to me, it means focusing on the fundamentals of who I am and what I do. Uh, don't get sidetracked by stuff that doesn't really matter. Don't get involved in a Twitter beef with someone. Don't get bogged down in gossip and he said, she said. Just focus on the fundamentals of my job, trying to write the best possible columns, books, stories that I can in what I'm doing, and the rest will out. That's kind of how I look at that. The piece of advice I'd leave for whoever comes on this podcast next is one that I try to follow myself. Keep a running list of the 10 best days of your life. That list is going to change over time, and that's okay. It's supposed to, but it should give you a good guidepost to what matters, what really matters, and to who you're becoming as a person. And I think it's a good thing to keep mindful of.
A running list of the 10 best days of your life. I love that. I will implement that. I'm going to create that list right now. I've never heard of that before. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's just something I don't know where I came up with it, but I do, and I try to follow it. Every once in a while I update them. The updates are not as frequent now because I'm married with two sons, and those are 3 days out of the 10 right off the bat. Boom, wedding day, birth of child one, birth of child two. They're pretty much set, but the other 7 spots can change from time to time, and that's okay. They're supposed to. Um, nailing fur elise for that piano recital when you're in 6th grade should give way to passing the bar exam if when you become an attorney. So it's something I try to just it keeps me on the straight and narrow. It keeps me between the lines of who I am and who I'm becoming.
Being on the Victory Degree podcast and doing this episode
There
with
you
me,
go. It's at least at number 11 right now, Nik. I can tell you that right off the bat.
all right. Well, that makes me feel a little bit better. I was hoping for 8 or 9, but I'll take 11. Mike, before we go really quick, any story or any lesson from Kobe that you want to leave the audience with? Anything that
Oh,
really sticks out?
that's a good question. Any lesson from Kobe? Um, I keep thinking of it's connected to Kobe, but I keep thinking of the speech that Greg Downer, his coach, gave after the team lost the game at a tournament in South Carolina. He called it the "Cancer of Me" speech. And I think if you pick up The Rise and read that section of the book, you can almost guess based on the title of the speech, "The Cancer of Me," what the speech is about. But I suggest people read that section of the book because it's really profound and really insightful on the way that selfishness uh, can work against you and what you want to achieve in your life.
Absolutely. Mike, what a great way to end this podcast. I thank you for your time and for coming on. Anything you want to plug, actually, before we leave, anything you want to plug, any social media or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, if your listeners are interested, they can follow me on Twitter, X at Mike Sielski, Mikesielski. And I have a new book coming out early next year. It's going to be called Magic in the Air: The Myth, the Mystery, and the Soul of the Slam Dunk. And it's kind of the history of basketball through the prism of the slam dunk. A lot of non-basketball stuff in there, kind of a journey through American culture and the sport of basketball through the prism of the dunk.
Excited to read that one. Mike, all your links will be in the description of this podcast. So like Mike said, go follow him on Twitter. Go pick up The Rise. highly suggest you read this book. Again, like I said, if you're an NBA fan or just a fan of greatness, it's a great read. Mike, I thank you for your time and wish you the best of luck.
Nick, my pleasure. Thanks so much.